In Burkina Faso, there was a secret everyone knew. President Ibrahim Traoré wasn't really Ibrahim Traoré. The real leader had been severely wounded in an assassination attempt 2 months ago and was secretly receiving treatment. The person appearing before the public, giving speeches and making decisions, was a body double who looked exactly like him. But one day, the double made an unexpected decision. He refused to be just a shadow anymore. The night was thick with heat and tension as Dr. Amina Konaté made her way through the hidden underground passage beneath the presidential palace in Ouagadougou. The passage, a relic from French colonial times, had been sealed for decades until 2 months ago, when it became the only safe route to the most closely guarded secret in Burkina Faso. At the end of the tunnel, 2 elite guards checked her credentials before allowing her through the reinforced door. Inside was a medical facility that officially didn't exist, and within it, a patient who officially wasn't there. "How is he today?" Dr. Konaté asked the night nurse. "Improving, but slowly," the nurse replied. "The fever has subsided, but the wounds are still causing significant pain." Dr. Konaté nodded and entered the private room. There, propped up on pillows and surrounded by medical equipment, was Ibrahim Traoré, the real Ibrahim Traoré. His face was gaunt, his normally robust frame diminished by weeks of fighting infection and blood loss. 3 bullet wounds from the assassination attempt had nearly claimed his life. Only the quick thinking of his security detail and the skills of Dr. Konaté had saved him. "Good evening, Mr. President," she said, keeping her voice professional despite their long friendship. They had been classmates at university before their paths diverged, hers to medicine, his to the military, and eventually national leadership. "Amina?" Traoré's voice was stronger than yesterday, a good sign. "Any news from the outside world?" "Your double is performing admirably," she said, checking his vital signs. "Colonel Diallo addressed the African Union summit yesterday. The speech was well received." A complex expression crossed Traoré's face. Pride, relief, but also something else. Concern, perhaps even jealousy. "And the public? Do they suspect anything?" Dr. Konaté hesitated. "There are rumors, of course. Your sudden change in handedness didn't go unnoticed. Diallo is right-handed while you favor your left, and he doesn't have your scar from the Kaya campaign. But people accept him as me?" "Yes," she replied. "They want to believe, and Colonel Diallo has been well prepared." This was an understatement. Colonel Youssouf Diallo had been Traoré's friend since military academy. They had similar builds, similar features, and with the right haircut and the signature red beret, the resemblance was striking. For 2 months, Diallo had studied Traoré's speeches, mannerisms, and decision-making patterns. The inner circle of government officials who knew the truth was small, just 5 people, including Dr. Konaté. "The council meeting is tomorrow," Traoré said, shifting painfully. "Diallo will need to decide on the Chinese infrastructure proposal." "He's been briefed on your position," Dr. Konaté assured him. Traoré's eyes narrowed. "And does he agree with my position?" The question hung in the air, highlighting the growing concern. For weeks, Traoré had been sending instructions through Dr. Konaté to his double. But recently, Colonel Diallo had begun asking more questions, suggesting alternatives, sometimes even delaying decisions. "I believe he will represent your interests," she said carefully. Traoré studied her face. "You don't sound convinced." Before she could respond, Security Chief Ouedraogo entered the room, his expression grave. "Mr. President, we have a situation. Colonel Diallo has scheduled a meeting with the French ambassador tomorrow. It wasn't on your approved agenda." Traoré's face darkened. "Did he say why?" "No, sir. The meeting was arranged directly, bypassing the usual protocols." Traoré exchanged glances with Dr. Konaté. France had been Burkina Faso's colonial ruler until 1960, and relations had been strained since Traoré's government asked French troops to leave the country last year. Any unscheduled meeting with the French ambassador was significant, potentially dangerous. "I need to speak with Diallo immediately," Traoré said, attempting to sit up straighter and wincing from the pain. "Sir, he's attending the military graduation ceremony this evening," Ouedraogo replied. "He won't be back until late." Traoré's jaw clenched. "Then bring me the secure phone. I'll call him directly." As Ouedraogo left to retrieve the phone, Dr. Konaté checked Traoré's bandages. "You're not strong enough for confrontation," she warned quietly. "I don't have a choice," Traoré replied. The assassination attempt was just the beginning. If I lose control now, everything we fought for will be at risk. Neither of them voiced the growing fear that Colonel Diallo might be starting to enjoy his role as president a little too much. Across the city, Colonel Youssouf Diallo stood on the review stand at the military academy, watching the cadets march past in perfect formation. Wearing Ibrahim Traoré's uniform, with the signature red beret and dark sunglasses, he looked every bit the confident leader. Only those standing very close might notice the subtle differences. The way he held his shoulders, the slight difference in his gait. 2 months ago, when Security Chief Ouedraogo had approached him with this extraordinary request, Diallo had been hesitant. Impersonating the president, even temporarily, seemed both dangerous and ethically questionable. But his loyalty to Traoré and to Burkina Faso had ultimately convinced him. It was supposed to be for 2 weeks, just long enough for Traoré to recover from the worst of his injuries and resume his duties. 2 weeks had become 2 months. As the ceremony concluded, Diallo felt his secure phone vibrate. Seeing the special code, he excused himself and moved to a private room adjacent to the parade grounds. "Yes, Mr. President," he answered, the irony of addressing Traoré this way not lost on him. "What is this meeting with the French ambassador?" Traoré's voice was tense, accusatory. Diallo paused. He had hoped to have this conversation in person. "It's an opportunity we shouldn't ignore. The French are offering substantial counter-terrorism intelligence in exchange for reconsideration of their mining permits." "We've been through this," Traoré's voice was strained. "No negotiations on the mining rights. That was the whole point of our resource sovereignty initiative." "With respect," Diallo said carefully, "the situation has evolved. The terrorist attacks in the northern region have increased by 40% in the last month. Our troops need better intelligence." There was silence on the line. When Traoré spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Cancel the meeting, Youssouf." "That's an order." Diallo felt a flash of frustration. "You're not seeing the full picture from your hospital bed. I'm the one facing the families of dead soldiers. I'm the one who has to make these difficult decisions now." "You're not making decisions," Traoré snapped. "You're following my instructions. That was our arrangement." The conversation ended tersely, leaving Diallo standing alone, gripping the phone tightly. He had crossed a line and he knew it, but he also believed he was right. The question now was what to do about it. As he returned to Traoré's official car, a text message arrived on his regular phone. It was from Jean-Michel Leroux, the French intelligence officer who had been his contact during his military training in Paris years ago. "Looking forward to our discussion tomorrow. We have much to offer the right partner." Diallo stared at the message. The implication was clear. The French knew, or at least suspected, that he wasn't the real Traoré, and they were offering him a deal. That night, as he sat alone in the presidential office reviewing security reports, Diallo found himself studying the official portrait of Ibrahim Traoré on the wall. They did look remarkably alike. Same height, similar features, same intensity in their eyes, but they had always been different in critical ways. Traoré was the idealist, the revolutionary, willing to challenge Western powers regardless of the consequences. Diallo was the pragmatist, the strategist, always looking for the optimal solution, even if it meant compromise. For 2 months, he had tried to embody Traoré's idealism while making the daily decisions of leadership. But increasingly, he found himself thinking, what would I do if this wasn't temporary? What would a Burkina Faso led by Youssouf Diallo actually look like? His contemplation was interrupted by Defense Minister Traoré, one of the few who knew the truth. "Colonel," Traoré said, closing the door behind him, "we need to talk about tomorrow's meeting with the French." "The president wants me to cancel it," Diallo said flatly. Traoré nodded. "I spoke with him as well, but..." He hesitated. "I think you're right about the intelligence. Our northern forces are vulnerable without it." Diallo looked up, surprised. Traoré had always been one of Traoré's most loyal supporters. "You're saying I should defy his orders?" "I'm saying," Traoré chose his words carefully, "that the president's health condition may be affecting his judgment, and that the safety of our troops cannot wait for his full recovery." The implication hung in the air between them. This wasn't just about one meeting anymore. It was about who was truly in charge. "How many others feel this way?" Diallo asked. "Several key ministers," Traoré admitted. "We've been discussing the situation." Diallo stood and walked to the window, looking out at the lights of Ouagadougou. And if the president doesn't recover enough to resume his duties? What then? Traoré joined him at the window. The Constitution provides for succession in case of incapacity. But the public doesn't know he's incapacitated, Diallo pointed out. As far as they're concerned, I am Ibrahim Traoré. Precisely, said Traoré, which gives us options. Diallo turned to face him, suddenly wary. What exactly are you suggesting, Minister? Traoré didn't flinch. Only that we must consider all possibilities for the stability of the nation. After Traoré left, Diallo remained at the window for a long time. The meeting with the French ambassador was no longer just a policy disagreement. It was becoming a test of power. If he proceeded despite Traoré's direct order, he would be effectively declaring independence from his friend's authority. And if he did that, where would it end? The next morning, in the secret medical facility, Ibrahim Traoré was furious. Reports confirmed that Diallo had not cancelled the meeting with the French ambassador. Instead, it had been moved up, scheduled for 10 a.m. instead of the afternoon. He's deliberately acting before I can intervene, Traoré told Dr. Konaté as she changed his bandages. This isn't just about one meeting anymore. It's a power move. Perhaps he truly believes it's the right decision for the country, she suggested, trying to keep her tone neutral. Traoré gave her a sharp look. Whose side are you on, Amina? I'm on the side of your health and Burkina Faso's stability, she replied evenly. And I'm concerned that this conflict between you and Diallo threatens both. Traoré's expression softened slightly. I trusted him with everything. My identity, my authority, my vision for our country. And now he's using it to undermine everything we've worked for. Then perhaps it's time to end the charade, Dr. Konaté said quietly. Announce your injury, your recovery, and resume your duties publicly, even if you're not fully healed. Traoré considered this. The original plan had been to keep his injury secret to prevent destabilization. The assassination attempt had been sophisticated, likely backed by foreign interests unhappy with his policies of resource nationalism and military self-reliance. If those same interests knew he was vulnerable, they might push harder, perhaps even attempt another assassination or a coup. But now the greater threat seemed to be coming from within. Prepare me for transport, he decided. I need to be at the palace before that meeting. Dr. Konaté looked alarmed. You're not strong enough. The journey alone could reopen your wounds. I don't have a choice, Traoré insisted. I can't let Diallo undo everything we've built. While this drama unfolded beneath the palace, Colonel Diallo was preparing for his meeting with French Ambassador Philippe Marchand. He had slept little, wrestling with the decision to proceed despite Traoré's explicit order to cancel. But morning had brought clarity. The intelligence that France was offering could save Burkinabe lives. That had to take precedence over ideological purity. The French ambassador arrived precisely at 10 a.m., impeccably dressed and accompanied by a military attaché whom Diallo recognized as Jean-Michel Leroux, his former contact. Mr. President, Marchand greeted him with a slight bow. Thank you for meeting on such short notice. Ambassador, Diallo nodded, gesturing to the chairs. I understand you have intelligence regarding terrorist activities in our northern region. Indeed, Marchand smiled thinly. Though as I mentioned when we arranged this meeting, the intelligence comes with certain expectations regarding our cooperation in other areas. The mining permits, Diallo said flatly. Among other considerations, Marchand agreed. France has always been a friend to Burkina Faso. We merely seek a return to the mutually beneficial relationship we once enjoyed. Before Diallo could respond, the door opened. Security Chief Ouedraogo entered, his expression tightly controlled. Forgive the interruption, Mr. President, but there's an urgent security matter requiring your immediate attention. Diallo stood, apologizing to the ambassador. Please excuse me for a moment. In the adjacent room, Ouedraogo closed the door and spoke in a low, urgent voice. Sir, President Traoré is on his way here. He left the medical facility against Dr. Konaté's advice. Diallo's blood ran cold. How long? 20 minutes, perhaps less. Diallo's mind raced. If Traoré arrived while the French delegation was still here, everything would be exposed. The deception, the power struggle, the divided loyalty within the government. The diplomatic fallout would be catastrophic. Delay him, Diallo ordered. Security checkpoints, traffic diversions, whatever it takes. I need to conclude this meeting quickly. Returning to the ambassador, Diallo's demeanor had changed, becoming more businesslike. Ambassador Marchand, let's be direct. What specific intelligence are you offering, and what exactly do you want in return? Marchand glanced at Leroux, then slid a tablet across the table. On it were satellite images of a terrorist training camp near the Mali border, with detailed information about personnel, weapons, and planned attacks. This is just a sample, Marchand said. We have much more, including real-time tracking of key terrorist leaders. And in return? Reconsideration of the mining permit cancellations, particularly for the Tambao Manganese project, a return of French military advisors to your northern bases, and, Marchand paused, a shift in your government's public rhetoric regarding France's role in West Africa. Diallo studied the intelligence. It was genuinely valuable, exactly what their military needed to prevent the next wave of attacks. But the price was essentially a reversal of Traoré's key policies, the very changes that had made him both popular domestically and a target internationally. Time was running out. Traoré would arrive any minute. I need to consult with my Security Council, Diallo said, standing. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow. Marchand seemed disappointed, but not surprised. Of course, Mr. President, though I should mention, this offer has a limited time frame. Other partners in the region have expressed interest in similar arrangements. As the French delegation was escorted out, Diallo instructed Ouedraogo to take them through the East Wing, away from the main entrance where Traoré would likely arrive. It bought him a few precious minutes, but nothing more. He had just returned to the presidential office when the door burst open. Ibrahim Traoré stood there, supported by Dr. Konate, his face pale with pain and fury. "You betrayed me," Traoré said, his voice hoarse but powerful. "You betrayed Burkina Faso." The two men faced each other across the presidential office, one in the president's uniform, the other in civilian clothes, weakened but radiating authority. Dr. Konate helped Traoré to a chair, while Security Chief Ouedraogo stood uncomfortably by the door, his loyalty divided. "It wasn't betrayal," Diallo said finally. "I was trying to protect our people." By selling out to the French? Traoré's contempt was palpable. By undoing everything we've fought for? By being realistic, Diallo countered. While you've been here creating an ideologically pure Burkina Faso in your mind, I've been out there dealing with the actual Burkina Faso, with terrorism, poverty, and international pressure. So, your solution is capitulation? Giving the French back their mining rights? Letting their military return? My solution is pragmatism, Diallo insisted. We need allies, Ibrahim. We need intelligence. We need economic partnerships. Not at the expense of our sovereignty. Traoré leaned forward, wincing from the movement. That's what this has always been about. True independence, not just on paper, but in reality. Diallo paced the office, frustration building. Independence means nothing if our people are being killed by terrorists, if our economy collapses, if we're isolated internationally. And what did the French offer you personally? Traoré asked quietly. To stay in power, perhaps? To remain Ibrahim Traoré indefinitely? The question hung in the air. Diallo stopped pacing. They know, don't they? Traoré continued. Marchand and Leroux, they've figured out you're not me. Diallo's silence was confirmation enough. What did they promise you? Traoré pressed. Nothing explicit, Diallo admitted finally. But the implication was clear. They would support a transition of power if I proved more cooperative than you. Dr. Konate looked between the two men, understanding the full danger of the situation now. They're trying to exploit the deception we created, to essentially engineer a silent coup. It's not a coup if the people don't know the difference, Ouedraogo said suddenly. All eyes turned to him. The public still believes Colonel Diallo is President Traoré. They've accepted his leadership for 2 months. If the real President Traoré were to not recover from his injuries, nothing would change from the public's perspective. The implication was chilling. Traoré stared at his security chief, a man he had trusted with his life. Are you threatening me, Emmanuel? Ouedraogo didn't flinch. I'm describing reality, sir. Colonel Diallo has been effectively leading the country. Several ministers prefer his more moderate approach. The transition could be seamless. And what happens to me in this scenario? Traoré asked, his voice dangerously quiet. No one answered. They didn't need to. The options were clear: permanent seclusion, exile, or worse. Dr. Konate moved closer to Traore, her posture protective. "This is madness. You're talking about removing the legitimate president, the man the people elected. The people elected a vision," Diallo argued. "A vision for a stronger, more independent Burkina Faso. I share that vision. I just disagree on how to achieve it." Traore studied his old friend, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. "You've always been the compromiser, Yusuf, always looking for the middle path, but some things cannot be compromised. Our sovereignty, our dignity, our right to determine our own future without foreign interference." "Pretty words," Diallo replied, "but they don't stop terrorists. They don't feed hungry children. They don't build hospitals." The tension in the room was broken by a knock at the door. Foreign Minister Zita entered, then stopped short, seeing both Traore and Diallo. "Mr. President," he said uncertainly, looking between them, "the press is assembled for your statement on the Chinese infrastructure deal. They're waiting in the garden." This was the scheduled press conference that Diallo had been preparing for all morning. Over 50 journalists, both domestic and international, were gathered just outside. Traore and Diallo looked at each other, both understanding the significance of the moment. Whoever addressed that press conference would be recognized as the legitimate leader of Burkina Faso. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes," Diallo said. "No," Traore countermanded. "Tell them the president needs 10 minutes. Zita looked desperately to Ouedraogo, who remained impassive, then to Dr. Konate, who simply raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps," Dr. Konate suggested quietly, "this is a decision the Burkinabe people should make. The truth has a power of its own." A long silence followed. Then, to everyone's surprise, Diallo nodded. "She's right," he said. "We both address the press. We tell them everything. The assassination attempt, my role as your double, the French pressure. We let the people decide which path they want for Burkina Faso." Traore looked skeptical. "And if they choose your path of compromise? Then I'll serve as your loyal advisor, arguing my position through proper channels," Diallo promised. "And if they reaffirm your vision of uncompromising independence?" Traore considered this. It was a gamble. His physical weakness would be obvious to everyone. The revelation of the deception could undermine public trust, but the alternative was an internal power struggle that would weaken the country regardless of who won. "Agreed," he said finally. "The truth. All of it." As Dr. Konate helped Traore to his feet, Diallo removed the red beret that had become Traore's signature. He handed it to its rightful owner with a formal nod. "Whatever happens next," Diallo said, "it was an honor to be you for a time." Traore accepted the beret, placing it on his head with a grimace of pain. "And it was a reminder of who I must be, seeing you become what I could have been." Side by side, the real president and his double walked slowly toward the garden where the press waited, unaware that they were about to witness one of the most extraordinary political revelations in African history. The press conference lasted over 2 hours. It began with gasps of shock as both Ibrahim Traoré and his double appeared together, followed by a stunned silence as Traoré revealed the assassination attempt, his near-fatal injuries, and the decision to use Colonel Diallo as his stand-in during recovery. The journalists' questions came rapid fire. Who knew about the deception? Who was behind the assassination attempt? Had any of Colonel Diallo's decisions as President Traoré been against the real president's wishes? With remarkable transparency, both men answered every question. Traoré confirmed that the assassination had likely been orchestrated by foreign interests unhappy with his resource nationalism policies, though investigations were ongoing. He acknowledged the meeting with the French ambassador that morning and the intelligence for mining rights offer. This is exactly the kind of pressure that has kept African nations dependent for decades, Traoré told the assembled press. The choice facing Burkina Faso, facing all of Africa, is whether we continue to allow our policies to be dictated by outside interests, or whether we chart our own course, even when that path is difficult. Colonel Diallo spoke as well, explaining his gradual shift from merely implementing Traoré's directives to developing his own approach. I believed then, and still believe, that some compromise is necessary, he said candidly. Not compromise on our ultimate goals of sovereignty and prosperity, but on the means and timeline for achieving them. The revelation dominated global headlines for days. Two presidents, Burkina Faso's extraordinary deception, read the BBC. Double identity crisis rocks West African nation, proclaimed Al Jazeera. Social media exploded with memes and serious political debates alike. The French government issued a carefully worded statement denying any involvement in the assassination attempt and characterizing the meeting with Diallo as routine diplomatic engagement. Few believed them, especially after a whistleblower leaked documents suggesting French intelligence had indeed known about the double deception. Within Burkina Faso, public reaction was mixed but trended strongly towards support for Traoré. His willingness to reveal the truth, despite the personal and political risks, reinforced his image as a leader of integrity. Street demonstrations in Ouagadougou featured signs reading, "One Traoré is enough," and "No compromise on sovereignty." 2 weeks after the revelation, Ibrahim Traoré, still recovering but now appearing publicly in a wheelchair when necessary, addressed the nation again. This time, he announced a new government structure with Colonel Diallo appointed as his official deputy and advisor for national security. "Our strength lies not in uniformity of thought, but in unity of purpose," Traoré explained. "Colonel Diallo and I have different approaches, but we share the same goal: a strong, independent Burkina Faso that determines its own future." The masked leader affair, as it came to be known, fundamentally altered Burkina Faso's relationship with France and other Western powers. The public exposure of their pressure tactics made it politically impossible for them to continue the same approach. Instead, new negotiations began on more equal terms, with transparency as a non-negotiable condition. The assassination attempt was eventually traced to a coalition of foreign intelligence operatives and corporate interests connected to the mining industry. Several arrests were made, though the highest-level orchestrators remained beyond reach. As for Ibrahim Traoré and Youssouf Diallo, their relationship evolved into a unique political partnership. Their public disagreements became a feature, not a bug, of Burkina Faso's governance, a demonstration that robust debate and diverse perspectives could strengthen rather than weaken leadership. 6 months after the revelation, as Traoré finally regained his full physical strength, he and Diallo stood together on the balcony of the presidential palace, watching a military parade celebrating Burkina Faso's Independence Day. "Do you ever miss it?" Traoré asked quietly. "Being me?" Diallo considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "The power to make decisions directly, without having to convince you first." He smiled slightly. "But never the red beret. It never fit me quite right." Traoré laughed, touching the beret that had become his signature. "Perhaps that's the difference between us. You see power as a tool to be used practically. I see it as a responsibility to be carried, uncomfortable as it sometimes is." Below them, the crowd cheered as the Burkinabe flag was raised, its bright colors catching the African sun. Neither man could know what challenges awaited them, what new pressures would be brought to bear against their nation's sovereignty. But whatever came, they would face it with the strength that comes from truth, a lesson learned through one of the most unusual political deceptions in modern history. For the people of Burkina Faso, the masked leader affair had demonstrated something profound: that their nation's identity was not tied to a single individual, but to a shared vision of independence and dignity. It was a lesson that would shape their political consciousness for generations to come.